I have failed. All right. Premise 1. Premise 2. Therefore? Okay. To refute that syllogism, you need to show one of two things, or both things. You need to either show that the premises do not lead to the conclusion, or you need to show that the premises are false. Outside of that, the argument stands. Is everybody clear on this? The reason why I'm reiterating this is when you look at most of what happens, it helps to turn things on. Is that better? We're good now? Okay. Ooh, now I feel like I'm God. All right, let's start again for the sake of clarity and the tape. What are our 3 key words? See, now for the tape, you get to look like you knew what you were talking about. What is the syllogism? Premise 1? Premise 2? Therefore? Therefore, abortion is wrong. Premise 1, it is wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. Premise 2, abortion intentionally kills an innocent human being. Therefore, abortion is wrong. To refute that, you've got to either show that the conclusion does not follow from the premises or that the premises are false. Outside of that, the argument stands. And most of what stands for pro-abortion rhetoric comes nowhere near even challenging that syllogism. What you get instead are distractions. Distractions from the argument we're making. Now keep in mind, we not only made an argument, we defended it. What was our scientific case? Does anybody remember, and does anybody want to try to put it in a sentence? From the earliest stages of development, the unborn are what? Distinct, living, whole human beings. They're distinct from their mothers. They're not part of their mothers. They are distinct living organisms. They are living. Dead things don't grow, right? And they're whole human beings. Even though they're immature, the kind of thing they are is not in question. I don't know where the sound guy is, but I'm getting a lot of reverb through this mic that's probably irritating to you as well. So I don't know if we can drop the volume a little bit or otherwise drop the echo, but if we can, that'd be great. We then defended our argument with philosophy. We argued there was no essential difference between the embryo you were and the adult you are today that justifies killing you at that earlier stage of development. Differences of size, let's do the sled, size, level of development, environment, meaning where we're located, degree of dependency are not good reasons for saying you could be killed then but not now. All right, that's our argument. To refute it, show me that the science is bad, show me my philosophy is bad. But it's not going to work outside of that. What we're going to do today is look at 5 bad ways people argue against our pro-life argument. And what you're going to notice is these 5 ways are not refutations of our position. In most cases, they are distractions. They aren't even an attempt to refute what we're arguing. They are mere distractions. And if you learn to recognize these 5 distractions, you can plug their objections into one of those categories and deal with it effectively. You do not have to memorize every possible objection that could be thrown at you. You need to be clear on these 5 objections, these 5 bad ways people argue, then you're able to kind of categorize what the person is saying to you and understand why it doesn't work. So the first thing people do is they assume rather than argue. They assume rather than argue. I'm going to pick on somebody here. Let's see. Who shall I pick on? I'm going to pick on you because you've been a problem. All right. So do you have a brother?
No.
Do you have a sister?
In heaven.
Okay. Do you have a cousin?
Loads.
Loads. Name one.
Gabby.
What is it?
Gabrielle.
Gabrielle.
Yep.
And your name?
Michael.
Michael, have you stopped beating your cousin Gabrielle yet?
No comments.
No comment. Have you stopped?
Yeah.
You did. Good. When did that happen? Was that through a prayer and deliverance session, or how did you come to see that that was not a good thing to be doing?
Now I know why she immigrated to Australia.
Yeah, okay. All right, is he kind of over a barrel right now? Do you get the sense I'm enjoying this? Is my question to him fair, yes or no? Why is it not fair? What did I assume about him? Did I give you one shred of evidence that he does that? What did I do? I merely assumed it. You know what we call this? This is called begging the question. It's where you assume what you're trying to prove. Now, most people, when they use the phrase begging the question, use it improperly. Begging the question does not mean that raises the question. Begging the question is a fallacy. It's where you assume the thing you're trying to prove. And asking him, has he stopped beating his cousin yet? What was I assuming? That he beats his cousin. What was I trying to prove by asking the question? That he beats his cousin. But I presented no argument for it whatsoever. I merely assumed it. And when it comes to the issue of abortion, many people simply assume the unborn aren't human. They don't argue for it. They just assume it. The same way that I assumed that he beats his cousin, even though I presented no evidence whatsoever that he does such a thing. I just assumed it. This is called begging the question. It is a fallacious way of arguing. And let me give you some examples of the way people have done this historically. Have any of you read the book, the story, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn? I know it's an American literature, but I think it probably has got some worldwide appeal. Okay, you've read it, good. See if you remember this story. Huck is a rather adventurous little guy, and he is late coming back for supper, and he knows his Aunt Sally is going to give it to him. So he's concocting a story in his mind to come up with a reason why he is late for supper. And he tells Aunt Sally the following. Now keep in mind, he's been out frolicking around having a good old time. He has no good excuse whatsoever. But here's what he tells Aunt Sally. Well, ma'am, we were late for supper because we were on a steamboat and it blew a cylinder head. Aunt Sally says, well, was anybody hurt? No, ma'am. It killed a Negro, but nobody was hurt. Aunt Sally says, well, that's good because sometimes people get hurt. What was just assumed about the black man? That he wasn't one of us. You see how that assumption was just put right in there? This is what people do with abortion all the time. We should trust women to make their own decisions. Would anybody in their right mind argue that way if we were talking about killing toddlers? So why do they argue that way about the fetus? What are they assuming about the fetus that they're not assuming about the toddler? That the fetus is not what? Human. By the way, that'll be the answer every time I ask this question of you. How about this? Women have a right to privacy. Now, typically, here's what pro-lifers do. Well, I like women. I'm not for a war on women. I respect them. I really do like them. And we get all defensive. Stop. What is being assumed? Would anybody argue for a right to privacy if we were talking about killing teenagers? Well, some of you are going, wait a minute now, that might be all right. Seriously, would we? Why do they argue that way with the human fetus? Because they're assuming the unborn are not what? Human. Have they argued for it? No. President Barack Obama argued the following on the anniversary of Roe v. Wade. This is the Supreme Court decision that gave us abortion on demand in the United States in 1973. The President of the United States said the following in commemorating that day last year. Here's what he said. We celebrate this decision today because this is a country where, quote, everyone has a right to pursue their own dreams. Stop right there. What was just assumed about the unborn? That they're not human. What would have been your question if you were an intelligent and a journalist, two terms that are mutually exclusive. But if you were an intelligent journalist sitting in that press room, what would you have asked at that point?
The unborn also can have dreams.
I wouldn't have said the unborn can have dreams. I would have said this, Mr. President, with all due respect, you said that everyone deserves a right to pursue their own dreams. Does, quote, everyone, unquote, include the unborn? He just assumed it didn't. He begged the question. He assumed the very thing he was trying to prove. Is my mic not working?
It's working, it's just a little crackle.
Little crackle.
Sorry.
This is called a mid-session tune-up.
There we go.
There we go. Hello, Daniel Roger. Good to see you, sir. This is Daniel Roger with the M hat and on. I'm picking him out because he works for us at LTI. He's part of our team over here, and I just thought you should know that. Very smart guy, and if my throat gives out, Daniel will come up and teach this thing and do it in his sleep. So, plus he's a pretty smart guy. He's an ethics guy, a graduate degree, philosophical degree. So, you know, he's one of these guys that we're glad to have on the pro-life team who are smart and moving in the academic field and expect good things from this guy. Because after all, look at the company he hangs out with, me. No, anyway, moving along. What did I just assume about myself with that statement? Now, let's try another one. Women will die in the back alleys of Britain if abortion is restricted. Blood will flow through the back streets of London if laws are passed forbidding women to have abortions. What does that assume about the unborn? That they're not human. How do I know that? Unless you begin with the assumption the unborn aren't human, the back alley argument is essentially arguing that because some people will die attempting to intentionally kill others, the government ought to make it safe and legal for them to intentionally kill others, correct? It's only by assuming the unborn are not human that this argument gets any traction at all. And yet that's precisely the assumption that's being made. Why am I going over this over and over again with you? Because I want you to train your minds to listen for assumptions. C.S. Lewis said the most dangerous ideas in the culture are those that are simply assumed, not those that are spelled out. Ideas that are simply assumed are incredibly dangerous to us as a culture. We want to see those assumptions for what they are and clarify them for people. Because oftentimes people just accept it as given without a challenge. So let's try a few more. Somebody says to you, well, what about the fact that you don't trust women to make their own personal decisions? You want to take away their decisions. You don't trust them as full moral agents. All right, stop right there before you get defensive and say, oh, I trust women, I like women, I don't hate them. What should you do? Listen for the assumption. What is the assumption about the unborn when someone says you pro-lifers don't trust women to make their own personal decisions? What's being assumed about the unborn? That the unborn are not what? Human. How do you know that? Would anybody argue you can kill a toddler in the name of trusting women to make their own decisions? Never. So what are they assuming about the unborn that they're not assuming about the toddler? That the unborn are not human. How are you going to illustrate this for people? You're going to use a little tactic called trot out the toddler. And trot out the toddler, very important you understand how it works. It is not a tactic you use to demonstrate the truth of the pro-life argument. In fact, you use it before you even make your case. You use it to frame the argument. Here's a little debate trick. He or she who frames the issue wins the exchange. Anytime there's an argument, he or she who frames the issue wins. That's true everywhere but marriage, where men it's just better to say, I'm sorry, honey, I'll try to do better, and things tend to run better in the household when you do it that way. Look at the ladies nodding and pride. Yeah, bro, preach it. Now, he says that's true. Is that from experience? Am I safe to assume that? No, not at all. Okay. Now, what is being assumed has to be made explicit. So when someone argues and they say something about abortion where they're assuming the unborn aren't human, you're going to use a tactic that clarifies that assumption. You're not yet arguing for your view, you're just framing the argument. And trot out the toddler is the tactic you're going to be using. Here's how it works. Anytime someone gives you an argument for why abortion ought to be allowed, in your mind, I want you to say, does this work as a good argument for killing a toddler? If the answer's no, what are they assuming about the toddler that they're not assuming about the unborn? That the unborn are not what? Human. Now please hear me on this. You are not going to compare the fetus with the toddler and ask the question, well, if the toddler's human, why not the fetus? That's not what you're doing. You're simply showing that the assumption is in play and they need to clarify that assumption and argue for it. So let's try this. Somebody comes to you and says, well, how come you don't trust women to make their own personal decisions? You don't panic, you don't get all defensive, you don't think, how do I prove this person I don't hate women? You're going to trot out your toddler. You're going to hold your hand at waist level, and you're going to say to the person, I have a 2-year-old in front of me. His parents want to rough him up in the privacy of the bedroom and then kill him. And they want us to trust them to make their own personal decision. Should we let them? What will the answer be? No, you can't do that. Your reply, 2 words, why not? Well, because he's a human being. Your reply, 1 word, said almost musically, ah. When I sing, things die. Maybe when you sing, it'll be better. But what? If the unborn are human like that toddler, should we be killing the unborn in the name of trusting people to make their own decisions? Well, that's different. The unborn isn't human, the toddler is. That's the question we need to resolve. Now let me ask you something. Have I even argued for my pro-life view yet? No. For all you know, I'm pro-choice. There are some pro-choice thinkers who would say, yeah, that's exactly how you ought to begin the discussion. Not all, but some. I have simply framed the debate around the question, what is the unborn? Remember yesterday I talked to you about how pro-lifers tend to message? We talk about all kinds of things that aren't at the core of the issue. Not that these things are necessarily bad, but they're not our primary argument. Our primary argument is not that Margaret Sanger was a racist. It doesn't resonate with people. They don't believe it. Our primary argument is not that women regret their abortions, though many do, and we ought to make their stories known, but not as our primary argument. We don't want to say to people, well, the gospel's the only way people get saved. That's true. But it's not the primary argument against abortion. Our primary argument is abortion is wrong because it intentionally kills an innocent human being. Trotting out the toddler brings it back to the issue, what is the unborn? Is the unborn a human being? That's the question we need to debate before we ask the question, can we kill the unborn? My friend Greg Kokel puts it real well. He says, imagine you're at your kitchen sink washing dishes. Your 5-year-old boy comes in behind you while your back is turned. And while you're scrubbing away at the kitchen sink, he says, Daddy or Mommy, can I kill this? Some of you might be thinking little boys, cute little boys, would never do such things, would they? Let me lighten you. This ring on my finger says I've been married for 30 years to the most glorious woman in all of Christendom. And we have a son, 25, U.S. Army, son, 24, U.S. Army, son, 19, graduated high school last year, and a daughter, 14. And I have personally heard the question, Daddy, can I kill this, more times than I can count? And almost always his hands are on his brother's throat when he's asking the question. Now, what's going to be the first words out of your mouth when you hear that little voice say, Daddy or Mommy, can I kill this? No, no's the answer. What's the first question? What do you got, right? Cockroach, snail, have fun, don't show your mother. Neighbor kitty, whoa. And brother by the throat, get counseling, right? You would not in a million years say, sure, son, have at it, till you answered the predicate question, what has he got, right? Now, you might be thinking, wait a minute, Andy, you flew this dude over from Atlanta for that? Yeah, it's a simple illustration. But it gets us to the heart of the abortion issue. Can we kill the unborn? That depends. What is the unborn? And men and women, if you do not start with that question, you will chase rabbit trails from here to kingdom come. You will be arguing, do you hate women? Why do you want women to die in the back alleys? How come you don't trust them? How come you want poor women to suffer? And on and on and on. You need to frame this discussion around the question, what is the unborn? When somebody says to you, you against abortion? Here's a good answer. I think abortion's perfectly fine. I agree women ought to have the right to make their own personal decisions. By the way, is my mic cutting in and out? Is that irritating to you? Is the mic on for the sake of the video, or is the mic on for the sake of the hearing? Both. Okay. It's okay, keep going? All right. I agree we should trust women to make their own personal decisions. I agree that poor women should not be forced to bring another child into this world. I agree the government should not tell a woman what she can and can't do with her pregnancy. I agree that pro-lifers like me should not impose their views on others who disagree. I agree completely if what? If the unborn are not human. If you can use science to demonstrate to me that the unborn are not members of the human family, and if you can use philosophy to show me that even if they are, we have no duty to value them, I will concede my point to you. Now, see how that frames the issue around the question, what is it? You agree with pro-choicers. You're right. If. That's the issue that needs to be resolved first before we start talking about all this other stuff that we tend to talk about. Which is why the pictures are really helpful. Because, as Greg has said, when you show the pictures, abortion protests itself. Against the backdrop of the pictures, you're already framing the debate around the right questions. Now you're just using your rhetoric to drive the point home even further, so that you're adding a verbal defense to the pictorial witness behind you. That's why pictures are essential. They convey truths that words often try to disguise. So let's try one together on our own. Somebody comes to you and says, you're a pro-lifer, you want poor women to suffer. That poor mother over there already has 8 other kids from 8 different men, and now you want to force her to bring a 9th child into the world that she can't afford to feed. She's already on government subsidy, and you want to force her to bring this child into the world. What's the first thing you're going to do?
What is the
Point
choice?
out that she's got bringing another unborn potential human into the world besides.
Well, I wouldn't say it's a potential human. We believe she already has another child, right? The only question is, what's she going to do with him? So you're going to trot out your toddler, aren't you? I have a 2-year-old in front of me, and hold your hand out. We live in a visual culture. Help them imagine it. I have a 2-year-old in front of me. His parents can't afford to feed him. Would it be okay if they killed the 2-year-old so they can balance the checkbook at the end of the month? What will the answer be? No, you can't do that. Your reply?
Why not?
Not ah. Some of you are too anxious. I heard that ready to go. You were ready to spring on that, weren't you? Why not? Because he's a human being. Ah, if the unborn are human like that toddler, should we be killing the unborn in the name of economic hardship? Oh, that's different. The unborn aren't human, the toddler is. Ah, that's the question we need to resolve. You see how we're exposing the assumption by doing this? We're taking the assumption and making it clear. And when people simply assume the unborn aren't human, all kinds of trouble ensues. I'm going to put a text up. Actually, it's already up on the screen. What I want to do is I'll scroll through this so all of you can read it. Can everybody read that text, or do I need to enlarge it a little more? We're good? Okay. What I'm going to have you do is read it, and then I want you to buddy up with the person next to you, and I want you, as you're reading it, grab a pen. I want you to make note of little assumptions you see where the authors assume the unborn are not human. All right? Now, what's interesting about this article, it's written by a man who claims to be a Christian. And he is arguing that Christians should support embryonic stem cell research. That's where we kill human embryos and use their body parts to treat disease in others. And he's arguing that if you are a Christian, you will support that. What I want you to do is read this and ask yourself, do I see places where he's assuming the embryos aren't human? Make little notes of it, then I want you to buddy up with the person next to you and just discuss that, and I'll pull you back together to interact with me on this. So I'll start moving you through this, and go ahead and start reading it. Oops. Make notes to yourself, just little phrases you might want to make note of, where the assumption is being made they're not human. I get the feeling some of you are seeing some flaws here. Am I right? Just a few? All right. Let's hear some feedback on this. What did you notice about this piece? Right off the bat, what assumptions did you catch where he was assuming the unborn was not one of us? Can you point out some?
Potential, he's saying that potential, that they already exist in the labs and there's no way they're ever going to reach, become born, so it's okay for us to use them.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, I've got a potential human being as well. A potential human being begs the question, well, if it's only potentially a human being, which is the right way to put it, what is it in actuality, an aardvark?
Right.
A mouse?
Sure.
The second one is morally relevant personhood. This guy cannot do metaphysics. The classic definition of a person is that it's an individual substance with a rational nature.
Right.
So it's not whether it can see, hear, jump about or anything, it is what is the nature of it. If it has the same nature as another person, then it's a person. But then you've got consequentialism. Even if it is a human, first of all, he's assuming that it isn't yet a human individual. That's where the potential bit comes in. Secondly, he stops short of declaring that human individual to be a person.
Right. He does. He does.
Yeah. And even if you do establish it as a person, the identity of the human individual person, his ethic is consequentialist.
It is indeed consequentialist. Now, let me stop right there for just a moment. Okay, go ahead first.
Utilitarian, the Good Samaritan, so let's kill somebody to save somebody else. Like, let's benefit somebody else, take the frozen embryos, take the bits from an actual human being, go and save the man that's being hurt.
Did you find it ironic he cites the Good Samaritan to make his case? Unless you assume the embryos aren't human beings, where is the author in the parable of the Good Samaritan? He's the one who beats up another human being to take from that human being something he wants, right? Unless you begin with the assumption the unborn aren't human, the authors are the thieves in the story, not the beneficial healers. Do you see how this assumption just goes right through? And the New York Times, the London Globe, the Toronto Star, the London Daily Mail, whatever, pick your paper. We'll just ride right over it as if it's no big deal. Right? Just assumes the unborn aren't human. Now, in the opening, he says, this research promises healing. What should be your first question at that point? Healing for whom? Is it healing to the embryos? It's only healing if you assume what about the embryos? That they're not human. What else did you catch?
Also, you can see that the embryos are being destroyed, and it doesn't pretend because for him, obviously, they're not human people.
Yeah, they're being destroyed. Did you find it odd that he said, oh, go ahead.
I wonder why he thinks it's to produce new embryos.
Bingo. He says, well, listen, we would never advocate creating embryos expressly for research. What would be your first question? Why the heck not? If they're not human, who cares? Exactly. Well, you people are becoming very sharp philosophers, I'm telling you. All right, what else did you note? Go ahead.
Are you going to discuss the references to God later?
What did you note about his references to God?
The subject that you started out with.
What did you catch about his references?
They feel guilty that they're interfering with God's will.
Yes, he did.
Healing is part of salvation, which is ordained. And if we don't allow healing, using abortion
Yeah. Did you catch the little guilt trip he was trying to lay on you there? Would he ever argue this way if we were talking about killing 2-year-olds? What is he assuming? The embryos are not human beings. He's not argued for it, he simply assumes it. And you saw it all up and down this article. Anybody else want to catch something that you noted in this piece? Yes?
He mentioned right at the end that it's obviously these important cures for Alzheimer's, cancer, and blah, blah. As far as I know, the only established therapy we've actually got from embryonic stem cell research is the eye tissue.
Yeah. I believe you're right.
Some positives from adult stem cell research.
Correct.
But absolutely zilch in embryonic.
You're right. No, you're correct. I think empirically you're right. There is no established research protocols I'm aware of involving embryonic stem cell treatments other than the one that was tried on a very limited basis with an eye therapy. And I'm not even sure the degree of success on that. And I think it's fine to point that out. I point that out second, though, not first. I first go after the assumption and deal with the question, what is the unborn? Because they're assuming what they're trying to prove. They're not arguing, they're assuming. So I'm going to point that out, then I'm going to do the empirical shift and say, oh, by the way, your therapies aren't working anyway. And the reason I do the ethical thing first, does embryonic stem cell research suddenly become right if it works? No. So we want to make sure we make the moral case before we make the therapy case. But you're absolutely correct. Yeah?
He focuses all on the healing of the diseases, but he absolutely neglects the fact that he's killing first.
Yeah. He focuses on healing, but doesn't deal with what am I doing to obtain that healing. Yes? I saw another hand back here. Did you have your hand up? You're good? Okay. Somebody else? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and then he says that it's okay to use the existing embryos because they will never be in the mother's womb anyway. But then the problem is that they won't become or find their way to the womb after.
Very good observation. He says, well, these embryos will never find their way to the home of a mother's womb. Why not? Because he wants to kill them before they get there, right? I mean, wow. I mean, this is just unreal stuff that's going down here. This is passive-aggressive theology, passive-aggressive morality being rammed down our throat, where we assume all kinds of things but never come right out and say what we're really saying. Go ahead.
If he really thought that these were humans, then he would either say that we shouldn't do this, producing embryos that just lays in freezers, or we should do something to make people adopt them.
See, it's guys like this that really get under my skin. I actually don't get angry at Peter Singer because he tells the truth. He's up front with what he's saying. Fetus isn't aware, newborn isn't aware, you can kill both. He doesn't do this passive-aggressive guilt trip thing. Guys like this just drip with contempt toward us. And I do not like it one bit. It's a self-righteous, very theologically passive-aggressive nonsense argument he's making here. I really, yeah. Anybody else want to comment on this before? Yeah.
It'd be like going to a country where you've got an orphanage with children that are never going to be parented, and saying that obviously we've got no parents for them, so we'll just use them to enable those that have illnesses, instead of trying to look for a solution to the orphanage is full of children, instead of looking for solutions to these embryos that we've now created. Well, that's what they should be looking at. Why are we creating them?
You're exactly right. Unless you begin with the assumption the embryos aren't human, that's precisely what you should be asking. Yeah, you're right.
And then
The other one.
Go ahead.
and then he tries to sort of lump Jesus' healing ministry into it as if Jesus has got a stamp of approval.
Never mind, Jesus said, suffer the little children to come unto me, but, yeah. Right, one more.
And Fiorenti's favourite, and she's notorious in this, she says, the question is not when does life begin, but when does it begin to matter? And that's where morally relevant person comes in, because you can admit, okay, this is a living individual human being, but it's not a person.
Right, we're going to get to that. We're coming to that. Now, I will say this about Anne. Anne actually rejects the developmental criteria that you see many people who support abortion arguing for. She actually comes right out. You know that SLED acronym we gave you the other day? She more or less affirms it. I've got the article where she does, where she says, listen, arguing based on development that the unborn are not human beings doesn't work. It doesn't work. And she says that. Now, she will go on to argue that a woman has a right, an absolute right to an abortion based on her autonomy and rights as a human being, but she does seem to reject this idea that we can draw this line based on development. We'll get to that a little bit later this afternoon. All right, final thoughts on this article before we move along. You all did very good noting this. Let's take one other example or two that we can just look at where people assume the unborn aren't human so that we can be aware of it. I think that this argument is probably the one you most need to be looking for. How about the idea that you shouldn't be imposing your religion on someone? You hear that one a lot? Now let's go back to something we said yesterday. What's wrong with dismissing an argument as being, quote, religious, unquote? Arguments are either true or false, valid or invalid. Calling it religious does not refute it. You've got to refute the argument. That's why we press syllogism over and over and over again. Would anybody argue you can you shouldn't pass laws killing toddlers because that's imposing religious beliefs on people? They only say that with a fetus because they assume what? It's not a human being. I think you're starting to get the problem here. So the first problem is people simply assume the unborn aren't human. They don't argue for it. I want to show you one other quote and have you look at it before we move off of this particular point. This is from an author by the name of Katha Pollitt. Katha Pollitt is, she's written a book called Pro, Reclaiming Abortion Rights. This is from that book. I want you to go ahead and take a look at it, see what you think. You see any assumptions there? Point me out some.
It's good for everyone.
Good for everyone. What would be your question, enterprising journalist major?
What about the unborn?
Does everyone include the unborn? Yeah. What does it benefit them? What else?
She uses the word pregnancy to mask the fact that it's a person.
Okay, so the word pregnancy is being used, yes?
It's a good deed. A woman obtaining one is a good deed.
So she's assuming abortion is a moral good without really arguing the status of the unborn. Okay, what else?
It turns children into a commodity that is either wanted or not.
Okay, turning children into a commodity, sure, absolutely.
I think she's making not so much an assumption of fact here, but an assumption of law. She's saying that legal abortion is a good thing. And that presupposes that if there's a clash between a woman's autonomy and the inviolability of a human life, the second has to move over.
I don't quite see that. I think she's saying the reason it ought to be legal is because it's good for society, but she's begging the question about who is part of that society. That's the issue. Yeah.
Pro-choice people, I think they very often talk about pregnancy and very little about the fetus or the child.
Yeah.
Ending pregnancy, all pregnant women end their pregnancies, mostly by birth,
Yeah.
and the child is alive.
Right.
So the pregnancy is one thing and the child is another thing.
Sure.
And they usually mix this up.
Yep. One more. Go ahead.
She talks a lot about the fact that they will not be able to support this child when the child is older. That supposes that their financial situation is either going to stay as it is or get worse.
True.
But actually, what she neglects to talk about is that actually that life has a future, and you know, there's every possibility that in the future, you know, from the moment of conception, that child will be provided for because it's a life.
You are correct that there are, in addition to the assumption about the status of the unborn, there's all kinds of economic assumptions being made. That people don't tend to have their economic condition improve over time as they mature. All of that, you're correct. But the basic assumption here is the unborn are not human beings. And that's what we're calling her out on. I saw a hand over here. Go ahead.
It's also children have to be wanted. You can't. If children.
Yes.
I think I've heard so many times that, you know, if you're using contraception, etc., whatever, then actually if something happens, then you're entitled to end that life because you didn't want it. It's not a value. It's disposable.
I passed 3 homeless men sleeping on the street outside Victoria last night on the way back to where I was staying. They were unwanted. Can we kill them? Only by assuming the unborn aren't human does the unwanted argument work. Yeah, this is the assumption. All right, last one.
We should acknowledge that realism is self-knowledge, so we should be acknowledging the realism of the baby. It's all about the woman, isn't it? Sorry.
Yeah, her idea of realism and self-knowledge doesn't include others she finds inconvenient. Sure. All right, second thing people do, and then we're going to take a break. Actually, where is Catherine? What is our break time? Say that again?
At 11, you're finished for a little while.
I'm finished at 11? I'm kidding.
Then Ruth's going to speak to us and then
I'm just giving you a bad time. All right, so at 11 I need to quit. All right, so I will start with the second thing people do. They assert rather than argue. They assert. Tell me if this is an argument or an assertion. Women have a right to choose. Assertion because I gave you no what? No evidence, right? I just asserted it. How about this? Socrates is a man. All men are mortal. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. Argument or assertion? Argument because I gave you what? Premises, conclusion. How about this? My wife is not here today. Therefore, she is in Las Vegas eloping with Michael Jackson, and Elvis is providing the music for the ceremony. I will die if this gets out of London. Now, is that an argument or an assertion? Really? Is anybody brave enough to say that was an argument?
Oh, it's an argument because it's got therefore in it.
You're right. It is an argument. The key word being therefore. Is it a good argument? It's a horrible argument. The conclusion does not follow from the premises. Not even close. Here's the thing. A lot of what passes for arguments for abortion rights never rise to the level of argument in the first place. They're mere assertions. Women have a right to choose. Choose what? And why should they have it? There's no argument. That's just an assertion. Women have a right to privacy. I mean, we pluck rights out of thin air in this culture without ever arguing for them or grounding them adequately. When you get this kind of thing thrown at you, it's very important that you learn a tactic from a television show. I don't know if it was even airing over here, but does anybody know of the television show Colombo? Does that name ring a bell? Oh, I'm in good stead then. For those of you that are under 50 and have no idea what I'm talking about, have you seen the movie The Princess Bride? Remember the old guy reading the story to the kid? That was Peter Falk, the actor who played Lieutenant Colombo. And my colleague Greg Kokel says we need to learn to take a tip from Lieutenant Colombo when people make assertions. Colombo's this detective. If you've ever watched the series, you know exactly what I'm talking about. He is not exactly the epitome of style. He's wearing an old wrinkled coat. He's got a crumpled up cigar. He doesn't look impressive. The crooks see him coming and they go, oh man, we are going to snooker this guy. He will never figure it out. What they don't know is he's dumb like a fox. He just keeps asking questions till he nails the person at the end of the show. And he'll start off by saying, Mr. Jones, tell me again where you were the other night. And okay, very good. He'll start to walk away and he'll come back and say, just one more thing I got to ask you. There's something really bothering me about this. And he'll one more thing him to death with questions. And at the end of the show, he will ask one question that just blows the lid open on the whole thing. We need to become a little bit like Lieutenant Colombo when people make assertions. We need to learn to ask questions that move the dialogue forward, expose assumptions, bring clarity, and help us, listen to this, key point here, put a pebble, as Greg says, in their shoe. Can I tell you something? Do you know what it's like to be out hiking and have a pebble in your shoe? What are you going to have to do eventually? Stop and deal with it, right? Greg makes a good point. As pro-life advocates is not to close the sale. How rarely, or let me rephrase that, how often do you find when you're in an argument with your spouse, those of you that are married, that you slap yourself on the knee and say, honey, you're absolutely right. Thank God he put you in my life to straighten out my twisted thinking so I could be a better person. Is that how it works? If you are saying yes, we are going to pray for you right now because you are lying. The reality is we as humans resist correction, do we not? It takes us a while. Maybe 3 days later in the quiet of driving our car or riding the tube, we'll think, okay, I didn't get that one exactly right. Same with the people we're talking to out at the displays. Do you think they're just going to look at us and say, thank you for destroying my argument? That felt really good. Is that what they're going to say? No. So what you want to do is give them something to think about. When you ask good questions, you give them something to think about. So here are your 3 Colombo questions Greg Kokel talks about. Number 1, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? Colombo question number 2, how did you come to that conclusion? And Colombo question number 3, have you considered the implications of your view? What do you mean by that? How did you come to that conclusion? And have you considered the implications of your view? In my next session, I'm going to pick up walking you through those questions, how you can use them, how they work as relates to abortion. And you know what's great about these questions? Have you ever felt like you're on the hot seat, you're getting grilled? Wouldn't you love to have a way out? Asking good questions puts you back in the driver's seat where you belong and gets the critic defending his claims since he's the one making them. And it allows you to do it in a Christ-honoring, winsome way, in a way that allows you to be artful in your method. We can win the argument with substance, and if we're rude and obnoxious, I'm telling you, we lose. We lose. Quick story. I was in Oxford night before last, and I had taken a bus from the town of Whitney, which is outside Oxford about 30 minutes. I jumped on the S1 bus, went into Whitney on the double-decker bus, and I was talking to 2 guys in the front from Chicago. They were Americans and totally clueless about your country. They were over there like, dude, we're going to Oxford. Well, what are you going to do there? I don't know, man. We're just going to go chill, you know. And I'm like, well, here are some things you might want to do while you're there. I didn't know it. There was a 24-year-old Czech Republic guy sitting behind me, former Czech Republic guy sitting behind me, listening to me talk to these fellow Americans who were clueless. And he heard me tell them, go to the Eagle and Child pub, have the fish and chips, it's really good, and well, we just want to go get drunk, It's like, well, why don't you try to see a few things before you do that, but if you're going to the pub, go to the Eagle and Child, and you can, have your pint and have your fish and chips, and at least be in the presence of great minds that once hung out there. This kid's behind me listening to me. I go to the Eagle and Child 3 hours later. I'd gone over to Magdalen College, and I go to the Eagle and Child. I'm standing there ordering my fish and chips, and this guy comes up behind me and says, the fish and chips weren't as good as you said they were. I said, really now? Now, it turns out he didn't put any vinegar or salt on it. Well, of course they tasted like garbage. I like a little fish with my vinegar. But anyway, he said, can I sit down and ask you about Oxford? So we sat down. I don't know where this came from. I have no idea. He said, tell me about your religion. He had somehow picked up just on the conversation I'd had with those guys on the bus that I was religious. And this guy was so frank in the way he talked. He said, I'm agnostic. I said, really? What are you agnostic about? He said, well, I just don't like faith. What do you mean by faith? Well, his idea of faith was a blind leap in the dark. So I said, listen, I had faith the airplane was going to get me here to London. It wasn't blind faith. I looked in the cockpit. There's 2 guys with uniforms. I'm on an airline that generally has a good reputation, and I'm on modern equipment. I had trust based on evidence. I said, I believe Christianity is true because, and by the way, we're sitting at the booth right under the picture of C.S. Lewis at the Eagle and Child pub. I'm literally right in that single table with the one chair on the other side with Lewis right above me, those of you that have been there. I said, my belief in the resurrection of Jesus is that we have strong confidence it really happened. And if God raised Jesus from the dead, I have good reason to believe Christianity is true. And we kept talking, and he said, well, I don't think God can exist if evil exists. I said, do you realize what you just assumed with that question? What's evil? What do you mean by evil? Well, evil is bad. But why do you call it bad? It's a departure from good. Wait a minute. For evil to be real, what else must be real? Objective moral standards that evil departs from, correct? Correct. I then said, objective moral standards, do you not think need an objective moral lawgiver? Ergo, your very argument against God based on evil seems to point me toward him. We talked for a half an hour, and then we got to the real point. He said, if you're right about what you're saying, this changes everything for me. Because Jesus isn't fooling around. You know what I loved about that? He understood the demands of Jesus better than a lot of Christians do. And he said, I am resisting because I don't like what this is going to mean for my life. I just kept asking him questions till we got to that point. I have no idea where that guy's going to be. I didn't close the deal. We didn't do a sinner's prayer there in the Eagle and Child pub. But do you think I maybe put a pebble in his shoe? Yeah. I think so. I think so. And that's what you need to be doing. So, I'm out of time. We'll pick this up in the next session.